Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is always the same. We take a dense pile of sources, and today it's a huge chapter from a major anatomy textbook, and we distill it down to what you really need to know.
And today's topic is a big one. We are diving into the mediastinum.
The central vault of the chest, and this isn't just a space with some vessels and tubes, is it? It's really the anatomical epicenter of the body.
It is. It's got the heart, the main airways, all the crucial nervous tissue that connects, your neck to your abdomen. It's everything.
So before we even get into what's inside, we have to set the boundaries. This space is, well, it's notoriously difficult to picture in your head. For anyone listening, what's the simplest way to define the mediastinum?
Think of it as the visceral core that's kind of trapped between the two lungs.
Okay.
So you've got the sternum and ribs in front, the vertebral column in the back, and it runs vertically from that main opening at the top of your rib cage, the thoracic inlet, all the way down to the diaphragm.
And it's not symmetrical, which is a key point.
Not at all, especially with the great vessels and, of course, the heart's natural shift over to the left.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with how it's organized. This isn't just one big open space, it's heavily partitioned. And the number one landmark, the invisible line that governs everything, has to be the sternal plane.
Correct. That horizontal plane is the master divider. If you trace a line from the manubriosternal joint.
That little angle you can feel at the top of your breastbone.
Exactly that angle. You trace a line straight back to the spine, and it lands right on the disc between the fourth and fifth thoracic vertebrae. T4, T5.
And that T4, T5 level, that demarcation is huge. It immediately splits the entire space.
Instantly. Everything above that line is the superior mediastinum, and everything below it is the inferior mediastinum.
And that inferior part, where the heart is, gets split even further.
Right. It's split into three more zones. A tiny anterior one, a massive middle one, and a long vertical posterior division.
This mental map is just non-negotiable if you want to understand what a mass in the chest actually means.
Absolutely.
So let's start up high in the superior mediastinum.
Okay, so this space is basically the main corridor. It's the highway connecting the head and neck down to the core. It runs from the manubrium back to those top 4 or 5 thoracic vertebrae.
If we're talking about traffic on this highway, what are the biggest things passing through?
Well, you've got the main conduits, the trachea and the esophagus. But the real density, the real traffic jam, comes from the great vessels.
Okay.
You've got the aortic arch itself, curving back and sending off its 3 huge branches.
The brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid, and left subclavian.
That's them. And they are massive structures packed very tightly together.
And then you have the drainage system to match.
Exactly. On the venous side, you have the big right and left brachiocephalic veins. They converge just behind the first ribs cartilage to form the superior vena cava, which then starts its journey down to the heart.
What's so fascinating here is how that vascular layout creates a really high-stakes environment for the nerves.
It really does. You've got the phrenic nerves, which are running sort of laterally on their way to the diaphragm.
Right.
More medially, you have the vagus nerves passing through. But the most critical relationship, the one that always comes up clinically, involves the left recurrent laryngeal nerve.
Ah, the one that famously hooks under the aortic arch. Is that just an interesting anatomical quirk, or is it something we really need to worry about?
No, it's a major surgical and pathological target. The left vagus nerve comes down, gives off this branch, and it hooks sharply right under the arch to go back up to the larynx.
So it's incredibly vulnerable there.
Very. Any pathology, an aortic aneurysm, big lymph nodes, even just trauma during chest surgery, can compress that nerve. And that leads to a paralyzed vocal cord and hoarseness.
So the superior mediastinum isn't just a pass-through, it's a choke point. Massive vessels and delicate nerves, all intertwined.
Precisely. And just for completeness, way at the back, deep against the vertebrae, you'll find the origins of the longest column muscles. But functionally, it's the vessels and nerves that write the story of this space.
Okay, now we cross that sternal plane. We're moving down into the inferior mediastinum and its functional zones. Let's start with the thinnest section, the anterior mediastinum.
The anterior mediastinum. You can think of it as a padded buffer zone. It's just squeezed between the sternum in front and the fibrous sac around the heart, the pericardium behind it.
And it's mostly empty, right?
Mostly soft tissue, loose connective tissue, fat, lymph nodes, and these little ligaments, the sternopericardial ligaments that kind of tack the heart to the sternum.
It's also where you find the thymus gland.
Yes. Crucially, in younger people, it houses the thymus, which we'll get to later.
Okay, here's where a small anatomical loophole becomes a big deal. The triangles of Morgani.
Ah, yes. The sternocostal triangles, think of them as little structural weaknesses in the diaphragm right up near the sternum,
Why do they matter?
because they are one of the few places where stuff from the abdomen can sneak up into the chest. A retrosternal hernia. But clinically, this zone's main relevance is really about access. If someone has pericardial tamponade, fluid building up around the heart, this is where you go in.
The peristernal or subxiphoid approach.
Right. It lets you drain the fluid safely without hitting the lungs.
That makes perfect sense. So we've got the buffer zone up front. Now, if the mediastinum is a house, we're heading to the main power grid, the middle mediastinum. What makes this the epicenter?
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is the broadest part of the whole inferior division, and it houses, well, everything essential for life support.
The pericardium and the heart itself.
Exactly. And not just the heart, but the roots of all the major vessels attached to it. The ascending aorta, the pulmonary trunk, the pulmonary arteries and veins.
And the airway elements are right in the middle of it all.
Dead center. You have the tracheal bifurcation, the carina, where the trachea splits into the main bronchi. All their lymph nodes are there. This is also where the SVC finishes its run and where the pharyngeal nerves pass right beside the pericardium to get to the diaphragm.
Okay, and finally, running vertically along the back, we have the posterior mediastinum.
This is that long, narrow corridor. It goes from the back of the heart all the way down to the diaphragm at T12.
A vertical highway.
A vertical highway is a great way to put it. The main column is the descending thoracic aorta running tight along the left side of the vertebrae. The esophagus is there too, starting out median but then shifting in front of the aorta as it goes down.
And deep against the spine, you find the drainage and control systems.
That's where you find the ischios-venous system, the thoracic duct, and the long lines of the sympathetic trunks and splanchnic nerves. And, of course, the vagus nerves wrapping around the esophagus.
Let's zoom in on that esophagus system. You said it lives in the posterior mediastinum, and it really is one of the most remarkable parts of the body's plumbing.
It truly is. It's the body's essential collateral route, the backup plan. The azygos vein usually starts down in the abdomen and comes up along the right side of the spine.
And then it does something very specific right above the lung.
It does. Around the T4 level, it makes this dramatic arch, the azygos arch, anteriorly over the root of the right lung, and then it just dumps straight into the superior vena cava.
And it's collecting all the blood from the chest wall.
Most of it, yes, from the intercostal veins.
So what's happening on the left side?
The left side is handled by the hemiazygos and the accessory hemiazygos veins. They collect the drainage, but they have to cross the midline, usually around T9 and T7, to empty into the azygos on the right.
So everything ultimately depends on that one azygos vein. Why is this collateral route so critical?
It can be a lifesaver. If you get a clot, a thrombosis, or even a congenital blockage of the IVC or SVC, the azygos system can expand dramatically to carry all that venous blood back to the heart. It just bypasses the whole problem. It's the ultimate backup.
Okay, let's switch to the lymphatic highway, the thoracic duct. Where does this giant vessel even start?
It starts down in the abdomen from a structure called the cisterna chyli around L1 or L2. It then enters the posterior mediastinum through the same opening as the aorta.
And at first, it's on the right side.
Yes, it ascends on the right side of the midline, kind of nestled between the aorta and the azygos vein.
It doesn't stay there.
Yeah.
It has that major crossover.
It does, around the mid-thoracic level, say T5 or T6. It crosses the midline behind the esophagus over to the left side. It keeps going up into the neck, arches over the left subclavian artery, and then drains all that lymph fluid right into the big veins at the base of the neck.
Which brings up a critical point for any surgeon or anyone dealing with chest trauma. If that duct gets injured, does the crossing point tell you where the leak will be?
It matters immensely. This is a high-yield clinical fact. Since it crosses at T5, an injury above that level causes a left-sided chylothorax, a leak into the left pleural space.
And below.
An injury below that crossing, where the duct is still on the right, will cause a right-sided chylothorax. That simple anatomical detail is key to the diagnosis.
Let's talk about the thymus. We mentioned it lives in the anterior and superior mediastina.
Right. And while it's huge relative to body mass at birth, it's the T-cell factory. It undergoes involution. It gets replaced by fat as we age, but it's still active.
And its position is important, sitting right in front of everything.
Correct. It's anterior to the ascending aorta and the left brachiocephalic vein. Sometimes the upper parts of it can even poke up into the neck.
Microscopically, this is where the body learns to identify itself. How is it set up to make T-lymphocytes.
You've got two layers. The outer cortex is just jam-packed with thymocytes, these T-cell precursors that are getting screened. And it's protected by the blood-thymus barrier, which is really important.
To keep them from getting exposed to antigens too early.
Exactly. Then the inner medulla has fewer cells, but it has these unique structures called Hassel's corpuscles.
And clinically, why would an adult need their thymus removed? A thymectomy.
It's often done for autoimmune conditions like myasthenia gravis, where the gland is thought to be producing autoantibodies. When surgeons take it out, they have to be so careful not to injure the nearby phrenic nerves.
Which would paralyze the diaphragm.
A catastrophic complication.
Okay, on to the nerves.
Huh.
The thorax is a massive hub for the autonomic nervous system. Let's start with the sympathetic trunks, the fight or flight pathways.
These run vertically, just behind the pleura and in front of the rib heads. A key detail is the fusion of the first thoracic ganglion, T1, with the inferior cervical ganglion to form the big stellate ganglion.
And the major outputs from these trunks are the splanchnic nerves.
That's right. These are the preganglionic fibers heading down to the abdomen to control your gut. The greater splanchnic is the largest, from T5 to T10, going to the celiac ganglion. Then you have the lesser and the least splanchnic nerves going to the other abdominal plexuses.
This connects directly to surgeries like endoscopic thoracic sympathectomy, ETS.
For things like severe hyperhidrosis, yeah. Debilitating sweating.
So what's the risk?
Well, the procedure involves ablating parts of that sympathetic trunk. The biggest risk is hitting the stellate ganglion. If you do, the patient immediately gets Horner's syndrome, drooping eyelid, constricted pupil, no sweating on that side of the face.
And then there's the compensatory sweating.
A huge and often severe side effect. They stop sweating in their hands but start sweating profusely everywhere else.
Now for the other side of the coin. The vagus nerves, the primary rest and digest pathways. And their paths are completely asymmetric.
Because of the aortic arch, right. The right vagus just descends deep and posterior. It passes behind the right brachiocephalic vein and behind the arch of the esophagus.
But the left vagus is different.
The left vagus crosses the left side of the aortic arch, and that's where it gives off its famous left recurrent laryngeal branch that hooks underneath.
And both of them eventually find their way to the esophagus.
They do. They form a big network around it, the esophageal plexus, to control peristalsis. Then they condense down into the final trunks that leave the chest.
Perfect segue. Let's finish with the esophagus itself, that muscular tube running down the posterior mediastinum.
Right, about 20 to 25 centimeters long.
Its path is interesting. It's not straight at all. It curves left in the neck, comes back to the middle around T5, then veers left again.
And as it descends, it crosses in front of the aorta to get to its exit point through the diaphragm around T11.
And because of that complex path, it gets squeezed at several predictable points, the constriction points.
Yes, and these are critical landmarks for any endoscopist. There are 4.
Let's list them.
First, at its origin, the cricopharyngeus muscle. Second, where the aortic arch crosses over it. Third, where the left main bronchus crosses it. And finally, where it passes through the diaphragm, the esophageal hiatus.
And these are the spots where a swallowed object is most likely to get stuck.
Exactly, or where you measure tumors.
The muscle in the tube also changes completely from top to bottom.
It does. The top third is all striated skeletal muscle voluntary. The middle is a mix. And the bottom third is entirely involuntary smooth muscle.
And at the very bottom, there's that dual sphincter mechanism to stop reflux.
Right. You have the internal sphincter, which is just specialized smooth muscle that stays tight, but it's backed up by a mechanical external sphincter.
From the diaphragm.
From the right crust of the diaphragm. It loops around the esophagus and physically squeezes it shut when you, say, breathe in or cough.
This area is a hot spot for pathology. We have to mention esophageal varices.
Yes, at the lower end, the esophageal veins connect with the left gastric vein. In portal hypertension, like from liver disease, that pressure backs up and these veins swell up into varices. They can bleed catastrophically.
And the other big one is achalasia,
which is the failure of that lower sphincter to relax because the nerves in the wall have degenerated.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive. We've mapped out the mediastinum as this dynamic, tightly packed space, all defined by that sternal plane. It contains the heart, the great vessels, the azygos drainage, the thymus, and all those critical autonomic highways.
You know, if we connect this to the bigger picture, just think about radiology. Recognizing the normal mediastinal silhouette on a chest x-ray is everything. The outlines of the aortic knuckle, the SVC, the right atrium, any little shift in those contours can instantly signal pathology. An enlarged lymph node, a dilated atrium pressing on the esophagus. Knowing the normal anatomy is the first step to seeing the abnormal.
That raises an important question for me. Knowing just how interconnected everything is in there, especially the great vessels. What are the limits of the body's safety mechanisms, like that azygos system, when one of those main highways actually fails? How long can that bypass really keep things running?
That is an excellent question, and it's one that keeps surgeons up at night.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has given you a vivid, three-dimensional mental map of the chest's most complex region.